here not because two presidents that we represent are here, both the president of ITC and Clark Atlanta University. I'm delighted to be here not because I spent my formative years on Payne College's campus as an Upward Bound student. I'm delighted to be here not just because I'm a graduate of Morehouse College in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm delighted to be here because I'm a native Georgian, born and raised in the part of this state that is not Atlanta, Augusta, which is only world-renowned 1 week a year. However, I have a distinct level of pride because the state Senate that represents and governs the state where I was born, raised, and dreamed are discussing the institutions that have made my reality possible. And so I want to commend you for gathering today. And if you would have had this hearing in Antarctica, I would have been here. I'm going to apologize to Mr. Rogers on your staff, Madam Chair. I'm going to have him move around this presentation a little bit so that we can stay in the timeline. I do want to say a little bit about what the United Negro College Fund is. What is UNCF? We're going to talk a little bit about historically Black colleges and universities. What are HBCUs? And why in the world are we having this one particular hearing based on these institutions? Why are they that important? So UNCF is this 78-year-old African-American legacy organization. When you think of Black legacy organizations, you think NAACP, UNCF. We're 78 years old. We're this essential acronym in the American lexicon that is synonymous with not only African-American or Black excellence, but also historically Black colleges and universities. UNCF does two things really well. Number one, we seek to represent private, historically Black colleges and universities. Those are names you know, like Morehouse, like Spelman, like Clark Atlanta University, like ITC. And they are names that you don't know because not as many people know Payne College. But we represent them, and because we have such an outsized brand in this space, we also take seriously to represent the concerns of all HBCUs, including public institutions, because no matter where you know it from, everyone knows our call and our motto: a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And members of the committee, if you use it without contacting our lawyers, they'll be in touch. So we take seriously the representation of HBCUs, and we raise funds for them. We're the only membership organization you know where we pay the members. The members don't pay us for being a part of us. In addition to that, we're a significant scholarship organization. And to the senator from Dallas, Georgia, we're going to talk a little bit about pricing. And we are a significant scholarship organization. We award $100 million to students. We award $100 million to 10,000 students in 1,100 different colleges and universities. So that's more than the 37 members of UNCF. That is more than the 100 plus HBCUs. That's likely people you know at every college and university, somebody there has had or currently has a UNCF scholarship. And so that makes us not only represent HBCUs, but wherever there are Black students, wherever there are underserved students, wherever there are economically disadvantaged students, we take seriously representing their concerns. So all of that is factored into what I'm going to share with you today. Right before we move into the rest of the presentation, I do want to say a little bit, because we've had previous presentations that delved into these matters on the surface level, why HBCUs are different from other institutions, why we're discussing them today. You should think a lot about HBCUs being likened into the story of and the conditions of African Americans in this country. HBCUs have a harder time accessing capital. We talk a lot about why HBCUs are not doing certain things. You have to put in context. You don't take a snapshot or a Polaroid in 2022. When you look at HBCUs, you look at the story of African Americans ever since the first ship came to the country. You look at the struggle to be able to learn, You see it in the context of our entire timeline, and you realize that they've been underinvested in since inception. And so they have a harder time getting access to capital. And when they do get access to capital, oftentimes it's at worse rates because the dirty little secret is that the banks think that HBCUs, like they think oftentimes African Americans, are risky investments. So they have to pay higher interest rates to do what it takes just to operate their business like every other college and university. So in essence, they're punished for doing what they have to do. Resources need to come in more. We'll talk about that, and a bit about pricing. 70+% of HBCU students are Pell Grant eligible. Pell Grant eligible is federal government speak for coming from a lower socioeconomic status. I was that Pell Grant eligible student from Morehouse College. When I made that 2.5-hour drive, and my stepfather, sometimes it was 2 hours. I'm glad he didn't get a speeding ticket. When he made that drive from Augusta to Atlanta every single time, I came to Atlanta all 4 years with the Pell Grant and the Hope Scholarship and institutional money from Morehouse and a $10,000 a year scholarship from UNCF, and all of that put together with a little elbow grease, a typewriter in the year 2000. And a checked out book from the Augusta Public Library made it so I could be debt free from college before I was age 30. But I'm the exception. I'm not the rule. And so how do you make that story more real without Tinkerbell coming along once in our lifetime, waving a magic wand and making debt go away? Not to liken the president to a Disney character. I will have us move to slide number 15, Mr. Rogers. Again, I apologize. I'm going to have you move, but I've tried to pull the specific numbers. So UNCF, we've mentioned that we represent the colleges and universities. For my friend, Dr. French, the president of Clark Atlanta University, we're going to start with advocacy, because UNCF has been instrumental representing these institutions to get very specific outcomes. So for our friends that are public policy and decision makers, we don't task you with automatically knowing what we want. We have to tell you what we want, and then you have to see if you and your colleagues have the political will to pull through. And so what we did on the federal level, in the CARES Act and in all of the major stimulus bills that provided for the coronavirus pandemic, was get HBCUs across the country $6.5 billion of grants, not loans, in the last 2+ years. Included in that number is forgiveness for 45 schools for loans that they had to the federal government, to the tune of $1.7 billion. And getting that forgiveness and getting those grants, not loans, for the institutions has allowed an institution like Clark Atlanta University or Morehouse College to reimagine themselves without tens of millions of dollars sitting on their books, for which the students, through their tuition and fees, had to make payments. And so not only are we allowing the institutions to emerge from this worldwide pandemic, which is still ongoing, but emerge whenever it is over, we're allowing them to emerge not the same way they went in, but we're allowing them to emerge stronger. And then, oh, by the way, these institutions are so unique and so focused on the needs of their students. Every kind of college and university and every single one in this state got coronavirus pandemic relief money. These are the only institutions that chose to use the money to relieve the student debt balances of their students when other colleges and universities had more money than these institutions. These institutions were so focused on their students that they wanted to make their students better. That shows you that there's a heart and soul of these institutions that is not everywhere else. They may lack in resources, but the care for the students and the ability to impact the underserved is something that you cannot measure. Let's go to slide 37. We're going to look at a few statistics. As you all can see, I'm sparing you a lot. Despite barriers to success, the outsized impact of Black colleges and universities is clear and astounding, calling into question the efforts of better resourced counterparts. Why do you say that? 80% of all Black judges, HBCU grads. 80% of all Black doctors and dentists, HBCU grads. 1/2 of all Black lawyers, HBCU grads. Half of all Black professors, HBCU grads. 50% of all Black public school teachers, HBCU grads. 40% of the Black members of Congress, including your predecessor, Madam Chair, HBCU grads. 40% all Black engineers. Why do those stats matter? Because these institutions are only 3% of the higher education landscape. Only 3%. And they have this kind of outsized impact by enrolling only 10% of Blacks that are in higher education. There's something exceptional happening on these campuses that's not happening elsewhere that allows those students to succeed in ways that those who are going to more well-resourced institutions are not succeeding. They're raised oftentimes in the same family, in the same neighborhood, on the same street. Yet the students choosing to go to the institution with fewer resources have the better outcome. Slide 38, please. 51% HBCU graduates, 51%, they are more likely than their Black peers to move into a higher income quartile. 56%, they earn 56% more than they would without their college credentials. This is a time period where a lot of people are calling higher education into question. An HBCU credential allows you to earn 50% more over the lifetime of a graduate, and we will get into the economic impact. We appreciate our peers that pulled our data earlier, but we're going to get into that in a moment, because a Black student with an HBCU credential earns $1 million more over their lifetime than if they did not have that credential. These are facts. Next slide, 39. And speaking of the economic impact, when you put all the schools together, there's a nearly $15 billion total economic impact. And the schools, when you put them together, hire and fire like a Fortune 50 company. I didn't say 500. I said a Fortune 50 company when you put them all together. This is the sum total impact. We'll get into the Georgia specific institutions one by one soon. Let's go to slide 53. This shows you where the schools are located. There was some discussion about the neighbors and what the neighboring states are doing. This is where HBCUs are across the country. HBCUs and some that are closely aligned with HBCUs. And you see a big dot there in Atlanta. And you see more dots across the state. I will call your attention to the one right there on the Georgia-South Carolina border. That's Payne College. But you'll see Georgia has a lot of HBCUs, and that's the reason why we're having this discussion today. Slide 59. We're going to look at the timeline of when these schools came into existence. You look at the timeline where Black people were in America from the 1600s moving up through current time. You have to wait until you get to 1837 for the first Black institution, and that was not in the South. You have to look post-Civil War and move your way right into the time period of the Freedmen's Bureau, et cetera, to establish these institutions here in Georgia and all across the country. There were many more HBCUs than the 100 plus that persist today. These are the survivors that you have. And so you see what we've been able to accomplish over a number of years. But this gives you a timeline of what higher education has looked like in the story of Black people. And it got really busy after the Civil War for us in terms of our ascension into higher education, but look how long it was desolate. This is the catch up, because sometimes HBCUs are compared with peers that were allowed to be established without the threat of violence or harm for centuries before we were. When you compare HBCUs, our preference is to compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. If I'm going to compare HBCUs, I want Clark Atlanta up against North Carolina A&T. I think that's a fair fight. I want Morehouse against Spelman. It's almost a fair fight because Spelman's going to win. But I don't want a Harvard versus Payne conversation, because that is void of historical and systemic items which are real and persistent and dictate the outcome. Let's go to number 66. I'm going to quote Dr. French now. He speaks about HBCUs and what we've been able to do. We have worked hard because the number one item that separates these institutions from others is it's not the skin color of the students, it's resources. Let's be real. These institutions, like others, have capable students with aptitude like you would not believe. The faculty is talented like you wouldn't believe, but they have to work harder because there are fewer resources, and they have to do more than other faculty would if they had more resources. The only distinguishing factor are the resources. If I were going to be crass, I would say, show me the money. But this is too dignified a body for me to do that today. But I have to say to the committee that the resources are the difference. And then there is, when we discuss resources, the temptation to want to look only at the public institutions. I caution this committee, when you look at the impact of HBCUs, the students that are choosing those institutions are not viewing publics versus privates. They're looking at what best suits their needs. So I caution you well in advance. Don't pit the publics versus the privates. Look at the impact overall and how you can support overall. Let's go to slide 68, and then we're going to stay a few in a row, Mr. Rogers. I know you'll be happy for that. 68's the who. What's at stake? Black excellence. So if you think, why are we having this discussion today? You know all of these names, and these careers wouldn't be possible were not for their HBCU education. Next slide. If not for HBCUs, separate but equal would still be the law of the land. Next slide. If not for HBCUs, the civil rights movement, which is so important to the history of this state, wouldn't have gone far. Next slide. If not for HBCUs, one small step could have been too big a leap. That Apollo 11 mission. Next slide. If not for HBCUs, Head Start would have been a non-starter. Next slide, please. If not for HBCUs, Juneteenth would just be another day. Next slide, please. If not for HBCUs, American history would be very different. Next slide, please. If not for HBCUs, there would be no rising Black middle class. What number slide are we on, Mr. Rogers? 75. Two more. Next slide, please. If not for HBCUs, Black arts wouldn't be a global phenomenon as we wait on the release of Black Panther 2. Next slide, please. And my CEO, the person to whom I answer, Dr. Michael Lomax, who is a resident here of Georgia, says HBCUs consistently produce community, national, and world leaders whose impact touch us all. HBCUs consistently showcase higher education excellence, modeling equity and social justice for us all. And now I'm going to ask you to go to the separate link, and let's look specifically at the economic impact of HBCUs. in Georgia. Let's look in Georgia. Continue to go down. You'll see all the institutions there at the bottom. Now, collectively, stay right there in that blue frame for us, Mr. Rogers. Go up just a little bit. Scroll up just a little bit.
Oh, that's blue.
Yes. Georgia's 9 HBCUs produce, and it's going to be bigger soon for my friends from Morris Brown. Georgia's 9 HBCUs, when this report was done, was $1.3 billion of economic impact annually with a B. 12,000 plus jobs. And one graduating class, one class every May, when you see graduation stories, think of this, one class collectively, their lifetime earnings are $9.1 billion. That seems like an abstract stat, except a lot of times when Black students come to Georgia to attend an HBCU, they never leave. So that means these lifetime earnings are staying in Georgia. For those that would question whatever this committee does and say, how do we pay for it? The Black college grads are going to pay for it with their lifetime earnings. Let's scroll down, Mr. Rogers, and let's pick a few of these institutions. Let's click in Albany State. Let's click the first one, non-UNCF member, but great HBCU. This institution supports nearly 1,500 jobs in Albany. In Albany, not Atlanta, Albany, nearly 1,500 jobs. They have an economic impact in Albany of over $140 million a year. And one graduating class, one class of their students' lifetime earnings will be $1.6 billion. 1.6 billion. Let's go back. Let's pull another institution. Let's try Clark Atlanta. Not because their president just walked in serendipitously. Clark Atlanta, at a minimum, supports 1,700 jobs in this city where we sit and stand today. Clark Atlanta has at minimum, and this is conservative as the Dickens, a $204 million economic impact here in hot Atlanta. Clark Atlanta's one graduating class, just one class, has lifetime earnings of $1.9 billion with a B dollars. Just for the sake of conversation, let's just go to Morehouse, only because I know a couple of alum. Morehouse, a neighbor of Clark Atlanta, supports about 1,600 jobs. That little bitty place, 1,600 jobs, $188 million minimum economic impact a year, nearly $1 billion of lifetime earnings for one graduating class. And if you let the graduates of Morehouse tell it, this many times that. I say all this to say to the distinguished study committee on excellence, innovation, and technology at historically Black colleges and universities. Investments are needed. These institutions differ from every other type of institution in this state. They've made an indelible impression upon this state. They make this state hum. They create the Black middle class in this state. The economic impact that they have is second to none. And this is all with minimal resources. Imagine what this classification of institutions would be if you invested in them like the flagship. And I'd be remiss to say this if I didn't say this. In terms of the bomb threats that have gone on for these institutions, a subject which is rather sore for me and all of those that we represent. There are funds that come from the federal government through Justice and Homeland Security, and they come to the state of Georgia and they pass through the state. And oftentimes those funds go to, for these bomb threats and other safety reasons, those funds go to the flagship institutions. It's obvious to me and to the news and print media that these institutions are the ones in danger. And so my call to the legislators is to work hard in the upcoming sessions to get the funds where they belong, to apply the balm to the misery, and to make sure that these campuses are hardened, they are protected, and they are supported, because until those that threaten these campuses are brought to justice, we have to do our part to protect the jobs, the impact, and the lifetime earnings that these institutions are producing every single day against the grain. And I want to thank the committee, the study committee, for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you. You've got several questions, and I've got some comments too, but I'll leave mine for the end. Senator Anderson, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One, if you don't mind, before we move on to our next speaker, to have our current HBCUs that are present in the room to introduce themselves. Sir. My spirit is leaping. And I have to say thank you for your work and efforts put into this. I want to say everything, including hallelujah and thank you, Jesus. One, because this was about education. And that's what it takes to get an understanding. And it was presented in a way that anyone who wanted to hear could hear. Secondly, we know why HBCUs were established, because we had to create our own space in order to have higher learning. Black students who choose to go to HBCUs do so, as you said, because it serves a purpose for them. Most white students don't have to work as hard at a PWI. So the space for Black students created at HBCU comes with creating a foundation that helps it become easy to learn in an environment of family. So the foundation is there, family is there, and we do like to have a little fun, because we understand that this is a safe space for us to project, to propel, and to prosper when we leave that space. You made a comment about scholarships, membership. How do you go about winning over institutions that have not joined? Because I cannot see why an institution would not be a member.
So we don't have a problem with institutions wanting to join. We have to make sure everyone meets the qualifications, and then the joining at UNCF is left up to the members. The members decide who becomes members of UNCF. There have been institutions that have been members in the past, did not qualify, and are re-petitioning, and that is something that I know the members are taking very seriously. But I carry out the whims and wishes of the members. I don't make those decisions, but organizationally, I'll tell you what, if the president of an institution that was not a member of UNCF called me on the phone, I would take him and her just as seriously as I take Reverend Dr. Williams and I take Dr. George French.
Thank you. And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Anna Vitarte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Murray, thanks for being here. And as a fellow Pell Grant recipient, I get it. One question I did have, I don't know if you can answer, and if not, maybe this is a question we need to research and have the committee follow up on, is, do you know, in terms of Hope dollars, how much do students receive at HBCUs, both public and private across the state?
We can pull that.
Okay,
Hope dollars received. What's the time frame you want us to look at?
whatever the chairwoman says.
I'll come back to you on that. The Student Finance Commission, those are conversations that we've started to have as well. So they may very well be able to get us that too, more quickly even. I wanted to say, and I didn't say this in my introduction, I'm not an HBCU graduate myself. Both of my parents are. And they both grew up in Mississippi on farms and both found their way to HBCU, Tougaloo College, now in Jackson, Mississippi, was at Tougaloo, Mississippi. And that completely changed the trajectory of their lives. So I'm a huge ally for HBCUs because I know that the life that I have and that my sister has is directly related to the fact that my parents were able to have an HBCU education that moved them to places that they never dreamed of being able to go. So thank you for sharing the economic impact of the schools. And to me, one of the real takeaways from your presentation also really is about the part where our HBCUs are creating a middle class. They are taking students who otherwise would not have opportunity to do as well in their careers and allowing them to really reach their own promise. A question that I have for you, two things. One, UNCF, and you named a lot of the private colleges when you were first talking. Will you just talk to us a little bit and explain just the distinction between you and Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which you also had on your sheet when you were doing the timeline, just so that we can understand that.
So UNCF started in 1944 as a campaign by the then president of Tuskegee University, noting that private HBCUs could raise more money working collectively as a fund than they could individually. It's a little known fact that many HBCUs until the 1900s, well into the 1900s, actually had white presidents because it was thought that if they allowed a Black person to lead the institution, no one would give philanthropically to the institution. And so some institutions until just about the 1960s. And so UNCF came together and they said, we're going to collectively fundraise. And so that's what we do today. We raise money for the colleges and universities. And twice a year, Dr. French, we make disbursements of resources to the institutions based off of a formula. In addition to that, I mentioned that we're the second largest private provider of scholarships in the country, period. $100 million leaves from us to Black students across the country. And we're the largest private provider of scholarships in the country, period, to minorities. Thurgood Marshall College Fund, they represent the public HBCUs. And so their model is a little bit different. They don't necessarily make disbursements of resources to institutions like we do. And their scholarship portfolio is a fraction of ours. However, they have a larger focus on making sure that students are prepared for workforce rigors in a very specific professional way. And so they have a very focused niche that they make sure their students are prepared for, and they were able to get permission from the late Supreme Court Justice, and he allowed them to use his name, and there really is no better name in our history.
Thank you. I do have another question, Senator.
Thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed your presentation. As you look at the funding formula for the Hope Scholarships and the Zale Miller Scholarships, please take a look at how the difference between the scholarship prior to the last bill that we passed and how it is being funded now or doled out to colleges and universities, so we can see where the majority of the funds and the funding sources is taking place.
we'll look deeply into that and
Okay.
be back in touch.
Because I think we'd all be a little surprised about that.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your being here today and sharing so much. And we'll distribute the presentation to everybody as well.